Good evening and welcome to Keeping Watch, a live stream series where we expose what's happening in Florida politics this week. I'm Natasha Sutherland, the Black Constituency Communications Director for the Florida Communications and Research Hub. Joining me today are Representative Tracie Davis from State House District 13 in Jacksonville and Ruben Lebron, Voting Rights Director at Building Back Together, to talk about the AntiVoter Freedom Act that's advancing this Florida legislative session. I'll kick it over to you to introduce yourselves.
I guess I'll start first, Ruben, if you don't mind, huh? I am Tracie Davis, state representative. I represent part of Jacksonville. I was elected to the State House in 2016. I'm a former special education teacher with Duval County Public Schools. And then I spent the next 14 years of my life conducting elections in the supervisor of elections office and ending that reign as the deputy supervisor of elections. So with that history, I'm so glad we're here to talk about this Anti-Voter Freedom Act with you, as well as Ruben, tonight.
Hey everyone, it's good to be here. Natasha, Representative Davis. I'm Ruben Lebron. I'm the Voting Rights Director for Building Back Together. And essentially, we're an organization dedicated to advancing the Build Back Better agenda of the Biden-Harris administration and communicating to the American people the benefits of those agenda. I'm here in Orlando in Azalea Park, and voting rights and civil rights, it's my life's passion. And it's what I've been doing here in Florida and throughout the country for many, many years, and excited to have this conversation today.
I'm really excited to have you both here with us this evening. Thank you so much. So before we get started, I wanted to remind those of you who are tuning in at home that there will be an opportunity to ask our guests questions at the very end. But feel free to drop those in the comment section at any time during this live stream. Okay, if y'all are ready, let's get started. We'll start with Rep. Davis. So Rep. Davis, legislative session. Something that has been, talked about a lot these last however many days, right? And for a lot of people, legislative session can feel confusing and overwhelming, especially if you're not familiar with the process or the terminology that's involved. So before we talk about the Anti-Voter Freedom Act, can you briefly explain what legislative session is? How does it impact everyday Floridians? And has anything felt different about this legislative session for you?
That's a loaded question. But I'll just start off by saying, legislative session is about 60 days. And we do that each year, where our Florida state representatives and our Florida state senators meet in Tallahassee to debate for hours and hours. We pass legislation, as well as our job is to balance the state budget, a budget we're looking at that's well over $100 billion right about now. But we also discuss policies that focus on education, transportation, infrastructure, healthcare. And that's hours of discussion, hours of debate, just to make the best decisions we possibly can. And those decisions impact everyday Floridians in their lives. And hopefully those decisions impact their lives in a very positive way. And so in short, that's what we're doing here for 60 days.
Sounds like you're pretty much doing everything for the state of Florida in 60 days. Is that right?
Pretty much.
Okay. In a nutshell, right?
Pretty much.
Wow.
A lot going on in a small window of time.
Absolutely. So it sounds like y'all are very, very busy in Tallahassee getting the work done. So Ruben, I know that Building Back Together does a lot of work to help advance President Biden's agenda in Washington, D.C. So we're talking about work at the federal level. And so much of what happens there is influenced by what happens in the states as well. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about the differences between Congress and the work that the Florida legislature does? Because a lot of folks don't realize that they're different.
Absolutely. I would say there's two main things that I want to point out. First is that, Congress is a much more deliberative body. Sometimes they're talking and debating things for years. Like the infrastructure bill that the Biden-Harris administration passed this year, right? It's something we've been talking about for years, and we finally got it done. As Representative Davis said, here in Florida, we only have 60 days out of the whole year to pass legislation in a state dominated by the Republican majority. So it's a sprint. Unfortunately, sometimes they use tactics that don't even allow voters and citizens to go and testify and be involved in the day-to-day process. So it couldn't be more different from each other. But what happens here in Florida is so important, not only for Floridians, but throughout the nation, because I like to say that states are sometimes laboratories for democracy, right? Especially for things like voting rights and civil rights. You see good ideas and bad ideas tried out in places like Florida. And then after a couple of years, we see how they worked out and how people like them. And then you see them spread out throughout the country. That's something that happened with automatic voter registration, right? It started in 1-2 states. People liked it. And now it's in half of the states, right? Either passed or being advocated for. So we really have to make sure that we don't let bills like these get out of Florida, because not only will it hurt our great state, but it will hurt Americans throughout the country.
Wow. I mean, talk about a domino effect, right? I mean, the work that we're doing here sounds like it's really important at every level. So let's go on to the bill that we have this week. We wanted to talk about, the AntiVoter Freedom Act, and that's moving through session right now. Rep. Davis, can you tell us a little bit more about what that bill is? And is it expected to advance in the legislature?
You keep coming at me with these loaded questions.
I mean, I feel like you're the right person for this because you've been fighting for our voting rights for a very long time here in Tallahassee. So,
Well, like Ruben, this is a commitment and passion, and I do spend a lot of time in the election and realm. And so just kind of studying the bill and understanding what's going on with it. But anytime we talk about something that's titled Anti-Voter Freedom Act, it's kind of not a balancing act there, but you're talking about something. This particular bill is basically a continual attack on voter access, and that's basically what it is. We have a governor that stated earlier last year after the 2020 elections that Florida was a gold seal of elections, and in 2020 Florida conducted the best election ever, and that other states should do it like Florida. And here we are since 2020 changing the way we do elections. This bill is laden with more restrictions, and some of those restrictions are implementing, and I know many people have heard about this Office of Election Crime and Fraud, and the only fraud that has been identified was voter fraud that was committed by some of my Republican friends down south. But that's a conversation we're not having. We're not investigating that fraud, but that office is being implemented or proposed with a price tag of over $1 million. It started off at $8 million. And so now we've lessened the number of investigators from 52 to 10. And now we're dealing with a price tag from $8 million and some change to $1 million. But this is also an attack on the vote by mail system. This bill calls for additional identification, your Florida state ID number or your Florida driver's license number or your social security number to be added to the back of a vote by mail envelope. It also calls for additional envelopes. It also threatens our third-party voter registration groups with certain violations where they were dealing with $1,000 up to $1,000 of a fine. Now they're looking at an increase from $1,000 to $50,000. So, that's just in essence the answer of, we're not going to have third-party voter registration groups wanting to do voter registration anymore if they are fearful of some type of violation and a fine at a cost of $50,000. So you're just looking at a vast majority of negative things that this bill will bring. And when you start dealing with the vote by mail and asking people to put personal information on it, voters are not going to understand that. It's going to be confusing. And then the rejection rate, where most of our counties deal with single-digit rejection rates, it will definitely double. And we will have upwards to double digits throughout this state with rejection rates. And I don't think any of us want that. So we're not looking at a bill that's friendly. We are looking at a bill, again, like I said, that is laden with more restrictions. And anytime you're not providing access to voting, you are suppressing it.
Wow. I think that's a lot for folks that are watching to think about, especially if this is the first that they're hearing about this bill. When I think about the freedom to vote, I can't help but think about communities of color, especially impacted by something like this. And from both of your perspectives, I'd love to know why Floridians and really the rest of the country, why should they be paying attention to this bill, to the Anti-Voter Freedom Act? And how will it affect Floridians if it becomes law?
Who do you want to handle that one?
We can start with Ruben if you like, and then you can go if you have anything to add, Rep.
Yeah, I would like to highlight what Representative Davis said. This bill essentially has the governor's personal election police force, and it has a lot of terrible provisions that are going to take voters' freedom to vote away, right? In a time where housing costs are skyrocketing, we're instead spending millions of dollars in taking away people's right to vote. So that's very, very unfortunate. And we actually, basing on my comments before about how states can sort of be laboratories of democracy, Texas is a great example. We recently in Texas saw a bill passed, and now they're having their first elections with those new provisions in that bill. And some of their mail ballot provisions are very similar to what we're trying to pass here in Florida. And the result has been disastrous. In Harris County, which is where Houston is located, obviously the most populous county in the state of Texas, election officials saw 40% of ballots rejected. Stop and think about that for a second. 40% of ballots rejected because this is the first time voters are voting with those terrible new laws. So that means out of every 100 ballots, 40 are being thrown out and you can't vote, or you have to go through an affidavit process to cure it. So I don't know what they're thinking here and what they're trying to do, because this is going to take away a lot of people's opportunity to have a voice in our elections. We're going to see lower turnout. We're going to see communities of color. We're going to see elderly people, people that live in rural areas, folks with disabilities struggle with participating in these elections because they're making you put like 3-4 envelopes, sign it 100 times. It's bad legislation. And supervisor of elections, nonpartisan supervisor of elections, agree with this. It is just bad practice. It's going to cost us taxpayer money. And it's, folks that were from both parties are saying that were supervisor of elections from both parties are saying that. And you can actually read an op-ed from the supervisor of election from Lake County saying that this is a recipe for failure. And I couldn't agree more.
I have to agree with Ruben. He is absolutely right, especially when he talks about the supervisors of elections here in the state of Florida. None of them agree with this. They didn't agree with the SB 90 that we're fighting in court. None of them agreed with that, and none of them agree with these changes. They know this is going to be expensive. They know it's unnecessary. I mean, we have 67 counties, and every county literally has a different type of vote by mail envelope. So to make sure that now you have an envelope to capture all of this unnecessary information, simply like Ruben said, it's going to be harder for our seniors, harder for our voters with disability, definitely an impact on our communities of color, of Black and brown people. And it feels like it's a constant attack with some of the other things that are happening here in the Florida legislature. So definitely fighting against this bad legislation because it is exactly that, Ruben. I completely agree with you.
Wow, that is just incredibly scary. I mean, I didn't even realize the differences from county to county. So you're telling me that if I wanted to help my grandparent, but they live in another county, I might not actually really be able to help them because they might have different requirements there. I mean, wow. Yeah. Sounds like a really big problem. And I think I would imagine that a lot of our viewers agree that this is a problem. I can't imagine 40% rejection rate like that in Texas happening here in Florida. I mean, that would just be disastrous. So if we have Floridians that are watching and they want to do something about this bill, right? They want to speak out or they want to get involved. For those that aren't in Tallahassee, what can they do to speak out against this harmful Republican bill?
We have these conversations all the time, and that's a constant question people ask. And we know people feel like calling and emailing the representatives and senators, like that's something that doesn't work, but it actually does. It actually does. So we encourage them to call. We encourage them to email their senators and their representatives and tell them to oppose this legislation, oppose this election bill, because it is unnecessary. It is a waste of taxpayers' dollars, and it's not something we need here in Florida. So call, email every day, all day, and make their voice be heard in that way.
Now, I know things can feel bleak sometimes, right? Given the majority and given some of the bills that we're seeing out of Tallahassee. But you have to remember that we've defeated bills like these before. And, even if we have a tough road ahead to do that, like Representative Davis said, we can make it much better or less worse, whatever you want to use. Right? The governor's personal election police force used to cost $8 million, and we got that to be much watered down now. But we still have a lot to do. So like the representative said, your calls, your emails, showing up in Tallahassee, talking to groups, everything that you can do, talking to your friends and family, right? Relational organizing, getting them involved in why this matters. It is not just about voting rights. It is not just about ballots. It is about having a voice in, our children's education. It is about having a voice in our grandmother's healthcare. It's about having a voice in our parents' job prospects and making sure they get good wages. So we cannot have a working democracy. We cannot have a system that works for all without us having our freedom to vote. So let's call them. Let's give them help.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that. I mean, so far with this live stream, every time we've had an elected official on here, they have encouraged folks to reach out, to call, to email, to show up in Tallahassee if they can and make their voices heard. So it's just great to hear that being reiterated here this evening. And for my social media warriors out there, share Florida Watch's posts too and help spread the word about what's happening during session. Maybe if that's more your speed. But I think that, at every level, there's something that everybody can do, whether that's sharing posts, amplifying, the things that are happening, to, supporting the good work that's being done here, to reaching out and, talking to our legislators. So thank you both very much for those suggestions. I think they're incredibly helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think that, moving forward, like we've said, people need to be involved. And is there anything else that you'd like our viewers to know about this bill, or anything else that's going on?
Well, this bill is definitely traveling. Again, so as we've mentioned, the calls and the emails, and actually Ruben helped me out there with coming up to Tallahassee to advocate the negative of this bill is definitely something we need them to do. This bill is moving through the House and the Senate. It is in a committee we call Appropriations right now, to talk about the dollars and cents that is attached to it on the House side. And it is actually will be heard, I want to say, on the floor, possibly tomorrow in the Senate, Thursday in the Senate. So it is definitely moving. And we need to work to change it for the decent. It's never going to be better. It's not going to be better, because an election bill and changes to the election process is just not needed. It's a waste of money and it's unnecessary. And the election process works as is per our governor, per our governor. So this is just something we do not need. But please call your senator, please call your representatives. If you have the opportunity to come up and advocate against this bill, we need you to call them and email them and tell them to oppose it and vote no.
And if I may, I have another call to action as well. There's another issue that is very dear to my heart, and that is language accessibility. I know that is slightly unrelated to this bill, but here at Building Back Together, we launched a language justice committee, and it is aimed at making sure that voters everywhere have access to election information and materials in the language they understand. Florida is a state that requires statewide coverage for Spanish language materials. So we also need to make sure that voters, those that are just newly citizens, that are native born, but whose first language is not English, have access to information that allows them to vote effectively and independently. So I hope that I can also work with, Florida WASH and Representative Davis in ensuring that we're increasing accessibility to the ballot box by ensuring language access throughout the state of Florida. So we also need to call our supervisor of elections, our representatives, and tell them and ask them for better access for all Floridians.
That's a really great point, Ruben. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I know language access, especially in the state of Florida, is a big deal for so many of us. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, Rep. Davis, and thank you, Ruben LeBron with Building Back Together, for taking the time to explain how this bill would impact all of our communities. As you all can see, we have a lot of work to do in Florida. In the meantime, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends and family so that they can stay up to date on what's happening in Tallahassee. And tune in next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. for our next episode of Keeping Watch. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.